Drive time. Can I welcome you all this morning? Big hi, shout out to everybody, especially in these critical times when so many of us have lost loved ones and we're seeing our family members and key workers so grossly overrepresented in the number of illnesses and fatalities our community is suffering. Of course, we'll be focusing on coronavirus internationally tomorrow at 4 o'clock. I hope you join us when we got a stellar panel from across the Atlantic to Africa to Brazil and here in the UK, where we'll have a transatlantic international African diaspora discussion. People like Reverend Al Sharpton and Professor Lumumba and Professor Perez from Brazil. You've got to hear what's happening to black people in Brazil under the new white ring racist President Bolsonaro. You will not believe it. It's like South African apartheid all over again. So do tune in tomorrow at 4 o'clock for those programs. Today we're focusing on black women's mental health. And I'm joined today as a co-host on the program to help me begin to navigate this issue by the dynamic Karen Allen. Now, Karen is a renowned author, playwright, inspirational speaker, transformational leader whose passion and purpose includes the empowerment and the development of her people. She's simply phenomenal. I've known her for a long time and I'm always blown away when I see her at work. Her life's work includes being an activist for social change, especially as it relates to the challenging and sometimes changing narrative around young black people and black men. She's a proud mother of 5 wonderful children. I can empathize with that, being a father of 9. And Mario, Anton, Alexander, Ashton, and Queen Annabelle. She affectionately refers to them all as the Allen Eagles, and they do soar pretty high. Come in, Miss Karen Allen, the co-host for this week's.
Good morning, Mr. Jasper. As you were talking about me, I was like, yep, that woman sounds pretty amazing. I was like, thank you so much for having me on. It is a privilege and an absolute honor to be co-hosting this discussion, number one, and to be on a platform with the right honorable Mr. Jasper.
Well,
privilege.
The honor is mine.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to today. It's going to be amazing.
Excellent. I'm hearing an echo. Do I hear an echo?
I can't hear it on my end.
Okay. My sound is
brilliant. Yeah, it's good.
Okay, my sound is good. Okay. Well, let's introduce the guest then. I'm going to introduce the first guest, Rosalind Daisy. Rosalind was born in the 1960s in East London. She has a passion for working with the community, specifically with children and families. She's a qualified probation officer, social worker and therapist, and worked in the criminal justice and youth service as a manager for many years. She survived a stroke in 2008, and then her life took a completely different direction. She suffered several losses in her life. First of all, she lost herself, she says, her father, her career, and then finally her husband. She's now divorced and she has 3 sons. In her spare time, she doesn't have any spare time. I don't know what spare time she's talking. She works voluntary for Black Sox, and she's been a Black Sox sponsor for 2016. And that's a social movement focused on building capacity and mobilizing in our community. She's dedicated to giving back, and she has a new book out, Wide Awake in the Dream, and it's available right now on Amazon. And this book really is a therapeutic piece where Rosalind seeks to come to terms and explain the challenges she had in her life. And it is a fascinating and compelling read. Our next guest, Karen.
Well, our next guest is Christine Wellington. I'm looking forward to hearing what all our powerful sisters have to say today. Christine is passionate about people, policy and change. Hey, Christine, lovely to have you with us today. She's an outcomes champion, facilitator and trainer. She's also an advocate of change led by the people, for the people. She's worked at local, regional and national level in the third sector. She knows when the trusted members of the community are organized and connected that we can create long-term change. As part of her remit, Christine supports charities and social enterprises that address race inequality, poverty, and disadvantage to create sound internal systems, which is very important to record and to report, has achieved a recognized quality mark for a trusted charity. As a supranational outcomes champion, Christine supports charities to package and pitch fundable solutions by using the outcomes framework approved by the Big Lottery Fund and Grant Making Trust. This is what she specializes in: community resilience, workforce trauma, and is part of the OMA, which is the Open Minds Alliance. Welcome, Christine.
And moving straight on, I'll introduce Jennifer Robinson. Now, she has a diploma counseling and BA honors and a diploma in supervision and MA Gestalt theory. And we're delighted to have you on, Jennifer.
And the proverb, if you like, it takes a village.
Oh, Christine seems to be speaking at the same time. Christine, can you hear us?
I can hear you, Karen. I can hear you.
Okay, listen, Christine, give us a moment. Lee's just literally introducing Jennifer, and then we'll come right back to you. So hold that thought, all right?
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you. Go ahead, Lee.
Hi, a wonderful Jennifer Robinson. She's qualified as a diploma in counseling and a BA honors, a diploma in supervision and MA Gestalt theory. If you don't know what Gestalt theory is, maybe she'll say a bit about that, but she's an expert in it and it's practice. It's a psychological science of the mind and a particular theory. Jennifer is the director of Janus Solutions. If you don't know Janus Solutions, they're a therapeutic unit based in Brixton. And can I say, we work with them all the time, and their compassion and commitment to supporting our community is second to none. She has her own private practice as well as Janus Solutions called Totally Humanistic. Love that title. As a psychotherapist, she specializes in working with a variety of mental health issues and substance misuse. She's the co-author of a book. Now, you need to get this book. It's called The Resonance Factor: Challenging the Myth of Addiction. The way that she and Kenneth come at the issue of addiction is completely innovative and novel. Trust me, you need to realize it doesn't involve drugs. It involves, well, she will tell you what it involves. She has a huge interest in the mental health and well-being of the Black community, both here in the UK and abroad.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Lee. Welcome, Jennifer. It's phenomenal to have you on the program and on the panel today. We look forward to your contributions. We also have on the panel Priti Rana Lee. And Priti is a mental health expert who specializes in mental health work for Mind. She's also the co-founder of Speak Your Mind, which is podcast that takes place and blogs that she broadcasts on Facebook and YouTube. And we are looking forward to Priti's introduction, Priti's inclusion today, and we are looking forward to some of the things that she will share with us. Lee, tell us about Sister Maxine.
Sister Maxine, the Rasta Queen from Nottingham. We go back such a long way. Pardon my informality in that introduction. Sister Maxine is a community activist. She's also an organizer with the Pan-African movement in the UK, and she's been at that dedicated post for decades. She's played an important role in organizing events and learning opportunities to promote positive African identity. And we're going to talk about the importance of culture to good mental health, I hope, in the course of this debate. She's promoted learning opportunities and focus on reclaiming Black history. And believe this or not, she worked alongside the great ancestor Stokely Carmichael, formerly Kwame Ture. In 2006, she co-founded AJAMU, Joint African Movement for Unity, to build a bridge between Black youth and older organizers. Intergenerational stuff is so important. From 2004 to 2011, in her local area, she led a program called Black on It, educating 14 to 16-year-olds about their great history. She's worked with parents and considered developing an independent Black school. She's an experienced equality and diversity specialist and manages a youth provision and runs community-based parenting courses on reconnecting parents with positive values, family and cultural values. She's a mother of two beautiful African adults, aged 26 and 22 years. And we're delighted, Sister Maxine, to have you with us today. Welcome.
Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Greetings. Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be with this esteemed panel.
Well,
and of course, to talk about the backbone of our community, Black African women.
Absolutely. Come on. Well, we are waiting for Pretty Rana. I'm not sure she's with us, but we'll continue anyway. And just wanted to do a few opening remarks. Now, remember that this show is news you can use. So you're not a passive audience. We're not here to lecture you. We're here to engage with you. So if you've got comments, if you've got resources in your locality, if you've got information, books, websites, contacts that you think can assist in those who need assistance, post them. We will make sure that they are promoted throughout the program. We're interested in signposting people to resources, not just talking about the problem end of it, but talking about the solutions end of it. Just to say that next week's program will be focused on domestic violence. We make no apologies for the focus on Black women and their experience on Lee Jasper drive time. And I'm hoping that it will see and encourage other Black brothers to retain a focus on this issue. Look, I've represented very many Black women and Black families throughout my 40 years of activism. And I can tell you the stress and strain and mental health and the toll I've seen with Black women trying to carry the fight against racism in the workplace, carry the fight against racism at their children at school, carry the fight against racism on the streets has taken its toll. And I've seen many of those women suffer incredibly as a result of that racism. I'd like to read you an article that I read by Nzinga Cotton. She's a writer and health professional, PR, living in London. And it was published in the Huffington Post in May of last year. And Nzinga wrote this, and it struck me, and I thought I would share it with you. She said, navigating life as a Black woman in the UK is fraught with overt and covert racism, discrimination, and daily microaggressions. This can include being undermined, overlooked, judged more harshly at work, being constantly reminded that you don't meet Western beauty standards, and rarely seeing the full range of your humanity expressed in the media. Added to that is the pressure we feel to be twice as good as our white counterparts, even though in most circumstances, it only gets us half as far. And then there is the weight of representing your race, knowing that people see your color before they see you. But while we have plenty to be angry about, the way we express our pain and vulnerability can be stifled and constrained by fear of being labeled the angry Black woman. This deeply offensive stereotype, which has its roots in racism and slavery, portrays Black women as naturally aggressive and confrontational. I just love the way she summed that experience up. And let's face it, we've got a lot to be angry about, because Black women are 3 to 6 times more likely to be admitted to mental health hospitals than the average, more likely to be compulsory admitted, less likely to be admitted into women's crisis houses as an alternative, and less likely to be referred to talking therapies. And we've been here before, haven't we? We mentioned last year, how many decades are we going to struggle with an NHS service that is completely cultural inappropriate for Black women? And then, of course, there's the issue of COVID-19 and the rise in domestic violence. Black women were already overrepresented in the figures for domestic violence than other ethnic groups. And COVID-19 has seen that amplified, and the stress and the mental ill health and well-being that places on Black women, we all know about. We spoke last week very much about the key issues of race and discrimination, social and economic inequalities, mental health stigma, the role of the criminal justice system. And we need to add into that sexual violence, trauma, prenatal and postnatal care. I'm aghast at the treatment that black women, pregnant black women, are receiving, both before baby's born and after the baby's born. Did you know that black babies are twice as likely to die in their first year of life than white babies? That's the heavy weight of a trauma that is being carried by our sisters. And then there's the issue of stress, because don't really talk enough about stress. And we said last week, and I make no apologies for going to repeat it this week as an analogy. Look, stress is a silent killer. I might say to you, here's a cup. How heavy is it? Not particularly heavy, you may say. If I hold that cup up, it's still not heavy. If I keep that cup in my hand, though it's not objectively heavy, it will become the heaviest thing in the world the longer I hold on to that cup. That's the nature of stress, and that's what it does to us. When you hold on, it becomes heavy. But we all know that accessing help early is absolutely key on the issue of mental health. And there are many government reports that cite the catastrophic nature that racism and institutionalized racism brings about in the provision of health services for black men and women. And of course, the Harvard Health Review recently reviewed racism and its effects on children and their mothers. And they too came to the catastrophic conclusion that racism is toxic in producing chronic stress. And let's face it, let's think about those who are suffering the hostile environment, those who are worried about immigration raids and the citizenship status of their partners or their children. And of course, Windrush. Oh my days, Windrush. Well, you can see the trauma and stress that has brought about. And of course, I couldn't really mention all of this without again going back to, and we mentioned it last week, intergenerational trauma. You know, the epigenic stress that is passed from one generation to another. If you've never heard of Dr. Joyce Leary, then you should go on Dr. Joyce Leary, post-traumatic slave syndrome, and listen to what she has to say about these issues. Here in the UK, as we did last week when we were talking about black men, we have to pay tribute to those who sadly over the decades lost their lives as a consequence of not receiving the treatment that they so much needed. And here I'm thinking about Melita Crawford in 1992, Cheryl Simone Hartman in 2000, Beverly Fowler in 2002, Natasha Chin in 2016, and a case that I was intimately involved in, the case of Sarah Reed in January 2016, and more recently, Annabella Landsberg in 2017. All black women who paid the ultimate sacrifice with their lives, having suffered mental health issues and finally found themselves in a criminal justice system that brought them to their deaths. The good news about mental health issues, such as they are in our community, is that 99.9% of them can all be treated with some intervention and early access. And we're going to focus on solutions here. Look up Black Thrive as a mental health resource in the community for black communities. Look up Sister Space over there in Hackney, doing some great work in providing a oasis of solace and protection for black women who find themselves victims of domestic violence. And secondly, how about outside of London? Well, the Khan network in Manchester. The Khan network in Manchester provides domestic violence circles that really provide mutual support for victims of domestic violence amongst black women. So that's me. I'm going to hand over to the hostess with the mostess, and let's get this debate on. Remember, post your comments, give us your signposted to resources, ask questions of the panel. Over to you, Karen.
Everyone, thank you all. Everyone who's joining us as part of the panel, those who are joining us as guests online. Thank you, Lee. What you've just, the foundation that you've just laid there is quite profound in so many ways. There's so many factors that are involved. And I believe, and I'm hoping that every woman that takes part in this discussion today, that she will add her flavor, her story, her journey to the discussion. And ladies, guests, I just want you to feel relaxed. I don't want you to feel as though you're being put under any particular, let's just pretend we're in my living room having a conversation. And that way the guests can get the most out of the conversation. Something I want to begin with, Lee, when you stated and gave the illustration of the cup, holding the cup, that stress is a silent killer. And I think sometimes we can underestimate the power that stress can have on us and the potential damage that it causes to us. So ladies, I want to start with a very general question. We're going to start really light and then we're going to go real deep. And it's really, I want to pose this question to Rosalind. I'm going to start with you, my darling. Hope you can hear me. Can you hear me, Rosalind?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you for being with us this morning. Thank you for honouring us with your presence. I want to ask the panel in general, what are your thoughts on this topic? So we're talking about Black women and mental health. All right. Now, in my experience, I do not ever remember ever having a conversation with my parents about this topic, for example. Now that I'm much older, I do talk to my children more openly, but probably not even enough. So just in general, according to the work that you do, the experiences that you have, how important is this particular conversation? Rosalind?
Well, I think it's extremely important. I grew up in a Caribbean family, and like you, Karen, it was never discussed. But I was around many women, Caribbean women who were strong, who were experiencing different mental health situations, like aunts and cousins and various people around me. I could see there was domestic violence, there was depression, there was psychosis, other mental health conditions, but it was never spoken about openly. And then through my professional career, coming across all types of women in different circumstances, because as you're aware, I was a probation officer, social worker, working with mental health and youth justice. So coming across all those different women, and a lot of them had similar themes, which ranged from attachment issues, domestic violence from partners and children, trauma, a lot of trauma, emotional, psychological, physical, sexual, financial, single parents with parenting issues, which generated mental health concerns around, especially around raising sons and bereavement, and working with a number of Black women in employment and the stresses that they experienced, and in relationships. So coming across all those factors with women and not having an outlet, and those women not having anywhere to go with their concerns, their stresses, was horrific, and still is horrific, because the services aren't fit for purpose in a lot of cases for Black women.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rosalind. I think that even some of those topics that you discussed there, I think that sometimes it's easy for us to look at the big picture and get overwhelmed, as opposed to us homing in on those things that may affect us individually and personally. And I think that when we come back to your story, because I know a bit about your story, I've heard you speak on a number of occasions, I do want to dive into more about when you did start going down your professional route and when you did start being exposed to the realities and the trauma of mental health, how that impacted you. But before I do that, Jennifer, if you could tell us, in your opinion, how important is this discussion, firstly, and was it something that was discussed in your household growing up?
Firstly, I would start with how was it being discussed in my home? Mental health was not discussed in my home, so I just want to really kind of reiterate that. And also having a mental, if you were experiencing, I would say, an unbalance of emotions within your home, it felt like it was the norm to have. What I wanted to highlight is I wanted to kind of break the myth of the strong Black woman, and where the strong Black woman is not allowed or doesn't have a space for vulnerability. And that vulnerability really is a highlight to mental illness. But when you can't see it within your own community and within your own home, then it's not seen as a emotional unbalanced mental illness, and so then it's discarded that a Black woman cannot be vulnerable. My experience of working in this way is that I think Lee Jasper highlighted the illustration of holding the cup, and what it does, it highlights how much Black women hold within their family and within their community and within the workplace. Working in this way is to unpack all of those layers, which can really go quite deep into the work of where this all started. Black women are holding a massive amount of trauma that the Black woman herself does not necessarily recognize, because she's always seen as the caregiver to take care of everybody else and not take care of herself. So that part of herself gets lost. And with my work, it's about how do we find that lost child to rebuild her as a woman again. So my work is about looking at all of these different types of issues that happen for the Black woman and bring them together, and to look at them in a more in-depth and deeper place where the woman is able to see herself in many different compartments and able to bring herself together again with support. Support is very important, as I've recognized in my own life that it's hard to access support, it's hard to ask for support, and it's hard to receive support, because that then taps into I'm not coping, rather than in actual fact you can't do things on your own.
That is so profound, and we are going to go much more into the work that you do, because I think that when you began and you started saying about Black women being able to access a space where they can be vulnerable, I think that that is something that all of us need, and something that needs to become a norm for us as Black women, and something that we also pass on to our children, that it becomes a norm, especially our daughters. So thank you, Jennifer, for the work that you're doing. And thank you for the spaces that you provided for us and continue to provide for us as Black women who do indeed carry a lot. Sister Maxine, can you hear me?
You?
Brilliant, thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. Tell me a bit about your experience in relation to mental health as a Black woman, and why it was something that got your attention to the point where you felt that you must engage in this kind of conversation and also providing solutions for our community. Tell me a bit about that.
Okay. Well, I think my experience has been more varied on the community activist level, and also what some might say more a political or Pan-Africanist level. So engaging with both women and men on the continent, in the USA, in the Caribbean, you know, looking at the aspirations of our people, you know, to have more independence and more control over, you know, over our future. And I think through that journey of building organization, what I've found is that a number of people within our community gravitate to different organizations because they're looking for a place of support, a place of refuge. And oftentimes the organizations are not equipped to support them. One of the reasons we're not equipped is because culturally we've not addressed the issues of mental health within our own communities, and also because of the way that we've developed our organizations. They're very compartmentalized. So if it's about youth, it's just about youth and having games and fun. If it's about housing, it's just about housing. if it's about the unity of our people, although that's a very big subject, it will look at political and economic issues. But we don't often look at, we don't often take a holistic approach. And I think what I've learned over many years is that a lot of people need somewhere to go where we can take a holistic approach. We don't have the luxury of the European community to have organizations that only deal with one topic. So I think our organizations need to develop a bit more where they're able to support the mental health or the mental well-being of their membership first and foremost. So that's been my experience. I've also worked with girls and women, and I think once you work with girls and women on any issues, just accessing services, addressing domestic violence, getting their children back into school, you experience firsthand the pressures that women are going through, bringing up children on their own, broken relationships, experiences at work which are often hidden, but they just eat away. They eat away at people. And I think one of the more recent things that I've been learning is that these issues of mental well-being, they go back generations, because when women and men, our women and men, talk about their mothers and their fathers and their grandmothers and their grandfathers, some of the behaviors and things that were done, we would now say that they reflect some state of mental imbalance. But growing up as a child, that young person didn't know that their life was different to anyone else's, and they couldn't understand why the things that happened to them did happen. And I'm not necessarily talking about things like rape and the extreme levels of abuse, but let's probably say lack of attachment, inability to express emotional warmth, and over criticism, those kind of things, that were kind of seen as normal within our families. So I'd say obviously mental well-being of our women is generational.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, brilliant. But I think that one of the things that you stated just there, in terms of how we as a community even express ourselves and how that can impact on our mental well-being, that's something that I definitely want us to explore some more. Before I go to you, Christine, I just want to thank our viewers and our listeners for tuning in. Please do share with your family and friends that the Lee Jasper Drive Time show is live. We are talking about Black women and mental health. This is an active conversation, so please put your notes in the comments if you have any questions that we have time to address. We will be throughout the program, so please don't forget to do that. Christine, I know that you are passionate about people, about policy, and about change. And your experience is vast. And I want you to just tell us a bit more about your experience with this subject and why it's something that is passionate. Why are you passionate about mental health, but in particular as it relates to Black women?
Wonderful. Greetings, everyone who's called in, watching the programme today. A very important topic was discussed last week, and today's topic is equally important. When I think back to the question around, was mental health discussed in my childhood? No, not at all. So as part of our upbringing as people from the African and Caribbean heritage community, we often speak about coping. You cope. So as a child, I may have experienced stress in terms of studying and completing my homework for school. That was the biggest stress on me. But that was a Caribbean household that I was brought up in, and education was the main focus. Study your books. My parents always had the focus on homework, and that could be stressful at times, but we had this whole approach which was about coping. Fast forward to date, I spend a lot of my time raising funds so that parents can have a better understanding of children's mental health and well-being. And we have some barriers to overcome. One, we don't like the word mental health. There's a taboo about the word mental health. We don't discuss mental health. We may talk about well-being. We may talk about emotional support, but we don't like the word mental health. Mental health, when we think about mental health, what we see is an overrepresentation of African and Caribbean heritage communities in mental health institutions. What we see with children is that they're excluded from school because of behavioural issues, and the solution is mental health intervention, i.e. medication, or maybe some therapeutic support. So from childhood to date, I'm passionate about parents having a better understanding of children's mental health. Now, given that most of the time, mothers are encouraging children to complete their education. Fathers are supporting in terms of moral support. Get on with your education. What are you achieving? Fathers kind of look at the results. So as women, we're often in a challenging position where you're balancing work and you're trying to help your children to complete their education. You're trying to get your own education and qualifications. So my big campaign is for policymakers to recognize there's an inequality, that our parents may not understand all of the psychological terms, references that are used. And what we need to do, some colleagues, sister said it earlier, is to increase our own understanding, organize, understand trauma, understand mental health in the mainstream context, but create our own solution. Understand that intergenerational trauma that we've been affected by, and we need to organize. And I'm looking forward to talking a bit further in the conversation about what I'm doing. We've secured funding so that grassroots groups can secure funding to have a better understanding of children's mental health. And it's our duty to claim some of that money from grant making trust and foundation, to claim some of that money from NHS mental health policymakers, and create our own solutions. I'm very passionate. My voice is going at the moment. Very passionate. And I look forward to coming back in to talk about how we can organise and secure funding.
Right. Brilliant. This I can't wait to get down that road, because I completely agree with you in terms of the fact that we definitely need to create and provide our own solutions culturally in terms of our own experiences. But I'm loving the fact that you are passionate about helping organizations to access the funding that is out there, because I think it was Jennifer who said that there are organizations out there, but often they don't understand where we are coming from as a people and as a culture. I want to bring my host back in with me. Lee, are you in the building? Something that you said, Christine. Hey, Lee, can you hear me, sir?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Perfect. Something that Christine said, Lee, that I want to really expand on, where she talked about mental health being a taboo subject. As growing up myself, and you know, my mom is the daughter of a Pentecostal preacher, so I grew up within the church, and I've had a lot of experiences within the church, and oftentimes mental health itself can be seen as a very spiritual thing, and people can see it as, you know, it's demons, etc., etc. And I'm saying that because I believe that culturally, the stigma and the taboo around the subject of mental health has stunted a lot of opportunities for us. And when I say opportunities, I'm talking about opportunities for us to understand each other as a people, to be more gracious towards each other. And I'm wanting to ask the women if they would be brave and bold enough to share with us just their personal stories as to how it has impacted them and how the taboo of it has impacted on your life. And just before you do, let me just kick this off for you. So 5 years ago, when I was pregnant with my 5th child, I have 5, as Lee stated earlier. You know, Lee's got 9, and I'm just, anyway, 9. So when I was pregnant with my 5th child, so I have 4 boys and a baby girl, my husband, who we were married 14 years, he decided that marriage was not for him. And he left. So I was pregnant, 3 months pregnant, and I had 4 sons. Now, during that time, as far as I'm concerned, especially in retrospect, I had a mental breakdown. Now, No one would have known to look at me that I had mental breakdown. But if you were inside my head, first of all, or inside my home, you would have seen that the things that were normal and natural for me, little things like opening bills or, you know, keeping the structure with the kids, it was so overwhelming for me to do the minor things that it now became just what Lee talked about, the stress with the cup, that it felt like I was holding so much that it was impacting on my mind. And what I had to do at that point was access services outside of myself and outside of my own circle that helped me to navigate that. So I guess my question to you is, in your personal experience, what services did you access, if any, or if not? Maybe it was a book, maybe it was an organization, maybe it was family members, friends. I don't know what it was for you, but what did you do? And not only what did you do, but if someone's watching right now, listening right now, and they themselves are going through a moment that they can't even identify or explain, what would your advice to them be as a Black woman who, as one of our guests, I think it was Sister Maxine that says, people look at us and assume that we've got it together, we've got to hold it together, you've just got to cope. What if someone's not coping? What would you say they do? Let me bring Sister Maxine back on that one. Oh, sorry, no. Rosalind, you got your hand up, so let me start with you. And let me also say, after Rosalind, if you feel that you want to jump on, please do indicate and I'll jump on you first. But go ahead, Rosalind.
Hello, can you hear me? Right, I just wanted to jump back to growing up briefly, because what I remember, my earliest memories was when I was about 9 years old, and my godmother and my mother were best friends. And I remember my godmother turning up at our house several times in her nightdress, looking completely unwell. And she would walk from her psychiatric hospital to our home several times just to speak to my mum. And the reason I raise that, because the value of sisterhood is very important.
Absolutely.
So that I just wanted to say that. But in relation to my experience, well, as you've heard, I had a stroke in 2008. So at that time, I was at the peak of my career in criminal justice. I had just, my youngest son, because I have 3 sons, was 18 months old. So I was just getting into the milestones of being potty trained, coming off his bottle, things like that. And then I was doing a course at the Portman and Tavistock Clinic. I was doing a course in forensic psychotherapeutic studies to help with my job. And I was actually going to college that day to hand in an essay on trauma when I collapsed. So that's the story of what happened to me. But then the main thing is, on that day, my life completely changed. And how I write it in my book is, I died and then I had to mourn my own death, because the person who I was no longer there, and I woke up as a disabled Black woman. So what did I do to get me through? I could, as someone else said before, being the strong one, not being able to be seen as vulnerable, I was the strong one in my family. I was the one that could always deal with the situation, could always support siblings or parents. So I didn't feel I could speak to them. And my mum took umbrage with this. She was really annoyed that I couldn't tell her how I was feeling, but I didn't feel I could, because I could see her weakness, I could see her fragilities. So I turned to my spirituality and my faith for support. And I met a wonderful priest in the hospital workplace who supported me greatly. I also turned to music. Music was my savior, reading books. And my tutor at the course I was on, she came and brought me reading materials for my course. And friends and family, extended friends and family, were really needed at that time, because they could just accept me for who I was, who I'd become, and they didn't show me any disdain, which was very important. So those are the things I can say that got me through. I was offered psychological services in the hospital and in the recovery unit and places like that, but I didn't think it was fit for purpose, so I didn't use them. So really, it was the priest who I spoke to, who I really opened up to, because my partner wasn't coping, my husband wasn't coping with it, and he refused to talk to me about it. So we couldn't share that between us. I had to be strong for my children. My son was 17 going on 18, just completing his A levels. My middle son was 6 and he was very sensitive and he couldn't cope. And my 18-month-old just wanted his mum and couldn't have her.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I had to be strong for them. And I had to be strong for my mum and dad. My dad came over from Dominica because he lived out there. And I could see the stress in his face. And my dad doesn't cope with stress well. It affects him physically. So I was worried about his health. I was worried about my mum's health, worried about everyone else. So, and that was just my personality. Always put everyone else before me. And I didn't have anyone that I could turn to. So what I did, I got through that. And when I was discharged from hospital, I had other challenges to deal with. At that time, my dad was diagnosed with cancer, like a few months later, and my marriage was breaking down, so I had to go through a divorce. I had to take redundancy from work because they were restructuring and it just wasn't the place for me anymore. And what else? So I felt I lost myself. I lost my marriage. I was losing my father. I lost my place, my career, losing my place in society. And I had to rebuild from that. And it was really difficult. And when I was lying in my hospital bed, I decided to write a book about this because I thought no one would believe what I was going through and how I was getting through it. So I wrote a book called Wide Awake in a Dream.
Wow, well done. Fantastic.
It's now available on Amazon.
Brilliant.
And it goes through the whole of my experience. But also I want to say that during that time as well, I sort of met Viv Armoun, who sort of drawed me into a meeting in Lewisham. And at that point, I decided to join Black Sox and became a Black Sox sponsor. And that gave me something to hold on to and to focus on to help me move forward.
Brilliant.
That's me.
Listen, I'm listening to you and my head is exploding from way back when you said you were going to hand in your thesis on trauma and then you collapsed, not to mention everything else that followed after that. Jennifer, I know that you have a private practice called Totally Humanistic. Roslyn, I really want to thank you for sharing and being so open, and I want to commend you on your book, the fact that you didn't just go through it, but you learned lessons through it and you've documented those lessons so that someone else can take those lessons and now impact. So that in itself is a resource that our listeners can go and access. Say, look, if she came through all of that and she is this powerful, beautiful Black woman that we can see on the screen, then surely there's something that I can draw from her story. So thank you for that. Jennifer, I just wanted you to come in and tell us a bit more about your practice and how your practice supports women like Roslyn who do go through not just one trauma, not just the trauma of having a stroke, but then, you know, losing her marriage and she's got these 3 children and then her dad is on the brink of death. How do you practically support women, children, men, whoever you do actually reach out to? How does your organization help with that?
Well, this is absolutely overwhelming and huge. And this is just like the tip of the iceberg in how to support mental health with women. Firstly, I would like to say is that from my background, that unsupported emotional self was not supported. And so therefore, a lot of emotions had to be kept within myself. So I'm going back to that space of not being able to share my emotions within my family space. Also, there was a massive interject. Now, I don't really want to stay on the therapeutic or the theory terms of what an interject is. So I'm just going to try to explain it maybe where everybody could understand. If you have a diet that you're being fed every day, you're going to eat it because that is your diet. And if somebody doesn't tell you to change your diet, you will not know how to change. And so therefore, there was a diet in my family of where you weren't allowed to talk your business. You wasn't allowed to talk your business outside of the home. And so therefore, the diet that I was fed was that nobody should know about me. Nobody should know about my feelings. I mustn't express my feelings. I mustn't express anything that is going on in my home. So therefore, I'm picking up the loss of myself, my emotional self, and not being able to express myself emotionally. What I found in my practice is that to create a space holistically, because people have spoke about what is this, the holistic way of working with mental health, and also I'm going to say with Black women, because everything needs to be brought into that space in regarding spirituality, balance, reflection, acceptance, your authentic self, your false mask, your true mask. All of those things need to be brought into the space. And how that works is that the relationship is formed by myself and the other. The relationship is formed in where we will start off with not trusting each other, because we also have dynamics within our community with Black women, of where Black women find it very difficult to express their vulnerability to other Black women other than the people that they know. And so therefore, talking therapy is a taboo, to where you go outside of your home to talk about things that are affecting you. So that has to be broken down. And how that gets broken down is to form the relationship, to have the foundation of a relationship, and also sister groups of where you come together and you share your trauma or mental health issues, well-being issues. You share them together so that you realize that you're not on your own on this journey, that you have a collective that can share and identify with you in this journey. One of the most healing spaces that you can access is groups, therapeutic groups, where you're able to look at a lot of issues that have happened to you within your life, within relationships you have with others, relationships you have with men, relationships you have with children, that you recognize that this journey is not a lone journey, it's a collective journey. I started to speak about the unsupported self. And when I'm speaking about that, it's out of balance. You're so, working with the women, what I found was that the emotional self was made redundant. Not that it's not there, but it's lost or buried amongst the layers. And so my work is to retrieve that emotional self, of where together we can share what has happened to you. How have you coped with what has happened to you? And also highlighting the transgenerational traumas that have been passed down to you, and how can you break that cycle of trauma that has been given to you, because it can happen. What I've realized is that when a woman makes an identification of where some of her anger started from, because my work is based on working within the here and now, we look at how that trauma has affected their relationships in the here and now. So something might have happened to you very, very young, of where you experience, let's say, anger, and you formed a creative adjustment in order to deal with that experience. That experience has never been talked about. And so therefore it is carried with you right into the here and now. And you are experiencing the same trauma that you experienced when you was very, very young. However, you don't understand where that comes from. My work is to support that understanding, taking you back to come back. They use the word Sankofa, if you want to go back to come back. And so therefore, that's my work, is to take you back, to come back into the here and now, for you to understand that the patterns of behavior come from somewhere, and that where you are now, there's the forum and the space to change, based around the relationship that is built with myself and the other Black woman, that we can change that relationship together with support. I am not there to hold her hand, but I'm there to walk beside her so that she knows that she has somebody there that is there to trust, to guide her, to reflect on what she has said, and so that she has an understanding of the pattern of her behavior. I could go on and on and on, but I know that I don't want to take up so much space because there's so much things that I'm identifying with all the other Black women that are on this forum that really highlight that there are so many experts in our community. What I've realized is that a lot of Black women don't know that you're there. And so therefore we need to come together as a collective and share that there are therapies, holistic ways of being, groups, that we can come together and that they know that they're out there, that they can share themselves in these communities. Because what happens in my experience is that there's a deconstruction of when you go outside of these communities, of you not being able to be your authentic self and you having to wear the mask in order to cope. And so therefore in that you lose yourself. And you have to find yourself again because you're operating from a white systemic society that doesn't necessarily see you or that you're invisible to them. And so therefore, it's very difficult to be fully yourself within those societies. What my work does is to bring you back to yourself, your authentic self, so that you're able to look at yourself from a spiritual aspect. You're able to look at yourself from the unbalanced aspect, that you're able to look at yourself for the abuse, you're able to look at yourself from the generational trauma that you are carrying, that there's an understanding of who you are and what you've been through with support.
That was just mind-blowing on so many, you know. I'm thinking, Lee, that you're probably going to have one-on-ones with these women at some point because the depth of information and experience, and it's very emotional, number one, but also very educational, empowering and informative at the same time. I want to highlight two things that you both said when you talked about the sisterhood and the importance of friendship groups. I think sometimes we can underestimate and undermine how important that is as a community. For example, I grew up in a family where cousins were very important to the connection. It wasn't just about our particular household, the nuclear family. It was about my cousins over there and my sister friends over there that helped us to get through stuff. And I think that that's something that as a community we do very well when we do it very well. And also, I love what you said, Jennifer, about accessing help within our community because we have experts in our community. So, Lee, I just want to quickly bring you in because I'm missing the sound of your voice right now. What is your feeling in terms of those who are in our community, who are experts? I'm talking about our counselors, our coaches, you know, our leaders in and of themselves. How do you think they make themselves visible enough, or do you think it's something that we as a community have to do to spread the word about them? How can we fix that so that we can access, you know, those services that are there for us specifically? What do you think about that, Lee?
Well, I can speak from my perspective as a Black man, and I don't think Black men are visible in enough visibility around providing support for our sisters. I think we've got to do more in trying to understand and being empathetic to the challenges, the stress, and the strains that they face. So I would want to see more from Black men as our own community. People talked about accessing resources and organizations, and I think that's absolutely right. Christine will go on to talk about that more, I'm absolutely sure, and I'm delighted she is doing. But my appeal would be to what are the assets that we already have in our community that are not being realized? And we've got lots of individuals that you've made mention of, and there are lots of Black men out there who are completely oblivious to some of the conversation that we're having today. Again, I speak for myself in terms of being a Black man. I grew up, within that West Indian household. I was that hyper masculine Black male. I had a particular view of women that was, that they had their place and I had my place. And I was that super, Black male figure. And what it did is it numbed me to the reality and the sensitivities of the realities of what black women went through. And I'll tell you when it struck me, for all sorts of reasons too lengthy to go into here. I became a single father at the age of 20, my first child at 15, but I became a single father responsible for 2 children by the time I was 21. And up until that point, I'd been playing the sort of fatherly role. Yeah, I'd go around at weekend, buy the kids clothes, take them for ice cream and take them to the movies and make sure they had what they want. But I was present, but I wasn't really involved. When I became responsible for the kids, my children, I'd had a life which was just running up and down and going to dances in, blues party and run up here and enjoy myself there as a young man. When I got them and I had to look after them myself, I remember that one day, it was a beautiful day, much like it is in London today, really hot. And on those days on a Sunday, I'd normally be in the park with my friends playing dominoes after a night out. And I was there in my flat with the 2 girls and I was washing their clothes for Monday morning school. And I don't know if you remember those old washing machines that spin one way and then spin the other. And you have to stand over them with a wooden, most men wouldn't even know what I'm talking about at this point, but you have to stand over them with a wooden spoon, right? And you have to dip it, right, to make sure that they get washed, and then it chug one way and chug another. So I'm there on this hot day, real hot, and I'm sweating. And I'm standing over this chugging washing machine and the steam's coming up. And I've got a pinny on just to protect myself because it's a wet business. And I just started to cry. And I had no reason. I didn't understand why I was crying at that point. And what happened is I began to get an insight, and it's only a partial insight. And I don't even want to put it in any way in comparison to some of the stories that and experiences we had here today. But in standing there crying, I thought to myself, how many times have I come in and seen my partner in a stressed state and said, what's the matter with you? You're only looking after the kids. What the hell's the matter with you? And in that moment, I realized that the stress of everyday living, the stress of I was feeling in terms of looking after my daughters had all piled on me. I was feeling very sorry for myself as a male, not being able to go out and party with my friends. It brought me to the point of tears. And from that point on, I began to have a much deeper and greater appreciation of the role of women in my life personally, but also of my mother and my aunties and so on and so forth. So I just bring that, experience from my own personal life as to appeal to black men that we've got to be more understanding about the pressures, particularly childcare brings about in relation to our black women. We've got to be more supportive. We've got to put our own hand in our pockets and fund some services ourselves. We've got to be that emotional trauma support for our families. And the way that we do that is by building organizations, building institutions, building the kind of trauma therapy circles that others have spoken about. And my appeal really is to black men to join black women and stand together so that we can support each other and support the wider community and our families in that regard.
Can you hear me? Lee, as you were speaking, I literally was self-talking. I was like, do not cry, Karen. Do not cry. Keep it together. Keep it together. Because to hear you affirm black women like that, and even just though it was a slight moment of a washing machine that I don't have no clue of what you're describing, because that sounds like an old age. I can't even remember what you were talking about. And although it was just a moment in your life, it was a pivotal moment in your life. Enough for me as a black woman who watches your life and watches how you speak of your wife and how you speak of your family, to be in awe of you. So if all of our brothers could have just a moment like that and it adjusts their attitudes or their behavior, it would revolutionize us as a community. So thank you for sharing, Lee. Thank you for being so open and transparent with that. And I think that if we just start within ourselves, within our own homes, that will make a big difference. I'm going to come to you, Christine, but I'm waiting because I know that you've got fire shut up in your bones I want to quickly address Sister Maxine, because I know that you are a community activist, and you spoke a bit earlier about it's not just about the women, but about the children and about the men. It's about us coming, the word community in itself talks about a common unity. So I really want you to speak into that, following on from what Lee has just said about the responsibility of our men to pay more attention to us as women, and to have more empathy for the cups that we do carry that just look like cups to them. But to us, we could be on the verge. If you could speak more into, probably, even if you have your own experience to share, if you would, or just to speak into that whole subject of communities coming to work together to help each other when it comes to mental health.
Yeah, I think from our own, when we look into our own culture, we understand that it's a collective culture. But we find ourselves here in the UK where it's more of a, nuclear family, individual culture. And over the past 40 years, that has really, really changed. Society has become a lot more individualistic. The society that we're growing up in now is not the same one that our parents grew up in. We still maintain those collective bonds between women and between men. We had certain roles that were played out, whether they were fulfilling or not was never, wasn't the issue, but we had those roles. And I think those structures helped us to stay to stay online, but maybe they also hid a lot of the cracks and a lot of the suffering. I mean, you started off by saying what were some of the experiences we had ourselves, and the sister Rosalind gave her experience. I just want to touch on one that maybe is not necessarily looked at, and it's the childhood experience, and my childhood experience of growing up, experiencing racism in this country and never really being able to talk about it as a young person, and never really having affirmation of my feelings by my own mother, because I grew up with my mother as a young person, and really being taught that there are things that you don't talk about. So it became very clear to me quite early on that there was a power structure within within society, not only in the home but within society in general, and there were things that you didn't say. And I think another stressful thing for me was the internalization of racism within my own within my own mother, where things like skin complexion, how you viewed other Black people, how we viewed Africa. You're too dark, your hair is too dry, your lips are too thick, your nose is too big, look pan you. These were just general things that I know happened within most households, or a good percentage of our Black households. I think I went on my own journey, and through cultural awareness and awakening, I found myself and I affirmed myself, and I've continued on that journey for at least 40 years. And I think that has helped me to cope with the difficulties of life in an alien culture, and that's where we live. And I think the continued refusal by some of us to speak about the fact that we live in an alien culture, and therefore to build our own institutions to survive, can only weaken, our mental health. Now, back in the 70s and 80s, we had lots of women's groups, sisters coming together. We then seemed to go through a period of where we were being criticized for organizing together as women, and this was seen as that it was leaving men out. The therapists have talked about the self and the need to the need to help women to find themselves and to explore explore past experiences. We can't change the past, but if we can understand the past, not only as an individual, but that bigger, the bigger past, the bigger experience that we live within, I think that can help us to change the future. So I guess the way I've tried to come to terms with things is that the mistakes that I've made, or the lack of understanding that I had as I've growing up, as I come to have more understanding, if I can pass that on to my children and younger people around me, I can help to build resilience within our community. We've mentioned, do women know that there are therapists around? Well, we're all around. We can't know these things if we only want to connect with the community when we have a personal issue. And I think this is one of the mistakes we might make if we adopt a European approach to dealing with our mental well-being. Mental well-being is linked to our wider experience. So I think the longer that we're part of a community and something that we can identify with, the stronger our mental well-being will be, and we will know what is available in our community. It's very difficult, I think, if one lives a kind of isolated life or nuclear family life, or I'm going to make it all on my own, and then it's only when things start going wrong that we then start looking for support. It becomes a bit more difficult then to know what's going on. I think we need to teach our children that to be part of a wider community, to be part of organizations, to love ourselves, to respect ourselves, to do work to develop our community, is all part of building resilience when you live within an alien culture. Now, if COVID-19 has not opened our eyes as people of African descent, then I don't know whether individual therapy can do it. We are living as a people under attack in an alien culture. Yes, we can adapt to it, but every adaptation that we make, it takes away from us. I would suggest that rather than adapt to it, we try and build our own self-determining units, organizations that address our issues in our own, in our own way, in a way that is useful and productive to ourselves. I found for myself, growing up in the 70s, that when I identified with a bigger picture, with my history, with my origins in Africa, when I came to terms with the fact that I'm an African person and all that means, when I openly expressed that to my parents and people around me who didn't support it, when I left my hair to grow natural and I took on board daily what that meant, which meant that some of my own people didn't want to look at me, didn't want to speak to me, didn't want to hear anything from me, which meant that some of my own brothers, many of them, didn't find me attractive, which meant that my own mother felt that I didn't look decent at certain times. But when I took that on and I dealt with the truth of that, it gave me strength, and that strength has taken me, has taken me through my life. So I think culture empowers.
Are profound. Culture empowers, and I think that sometimes when we talk about culture, when we talk about blackness, when we talk, even in having this discussion about women, for example, black women, people can think that in talking about one thing, you're dishonoring or disrespecting another thing, and that's not necessarily the case. In talking about Black women's mental health and help for Black women, we're not in any way saying that Black men are not helpful. One of the comments that I saw from, I think it was an Alex Gordon, he said, let's not forget that not all men are not engaging, with their children, which we completely, well, I completely know some of the most phenomenal black males. I am a co-host with one right now on this show. So in us talking about our experiences, it's not that we're dishonoring or disrespecting black men when we do say that, black men need to step up. We're number one, we're not speaking of all black men. Number two, it's just an encouragement, really, and an empowerment. And I think what you've just said there, Sister Maxine, about us as a community, we all know the popular African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. It's not just about individuals. When I was in school, I went to school in Enfield, and I grew up, I lived in Jamaica for a number of years. So I went to school in the Caribbean and came back over to the UK when I was about 12. And when I went to school, I was the only black girl in my year. And I used to speak of my cousins as my sisters, or my close friends as my sisters. And my white counterparts couldn't relate to that. They just could not relate to anyone who's not your biological sister being your sister. But as a community and as a culture, we're used to that. Well, we should be used to that. And I think to lose that loses the essence of who we are and where we can engage our supports from. So I'm going to bring in Christine at this point, because I do believe and agree that as a community, we have to develop and build our own systems and services that are unique to us. And in some cases, they will be exclusive to us, which again, doesn't necessarily mean that we are anti or against those that are not us. But it just means that we know what we need for the most part. Now, again, this doesn't include everyone, because there are some people within our culture who are not doing and do not know what's best for us. Like you just said, Sister Maxine, when you started to grow your hair naturally, there are some black men that no longer found you attractive. And these are black men who will, on the one hand, say we're supporting our black sisters. On the other hand, we want you to fling on that weave. Do you understand what I mean? So, Sister Christine, I want to bring you in, and I want you to share more about what you and your organization do specifically to help individuals and organizations who do have solutions but may not know how to put those solutions together, access funding for those solutions, and where can we go for that type of help. But before you say that, thank you for everyone in the chat. Thank you for those of you who are watching from near and far. The engagement is profound and powerful. I do want to pull on some of your questions, but I want to get as much out of this panel as possible. So please bear with us if we don't get to as many questions as we need to. Christine, please go for it. Share with us.
So my first question to all of us, is culture, heritage, and identity important? Can you hear me first of all? Wonderful. Is culture, heritage, and identity important? It's important for the Jewish community. We know that people are having an understanding of what the kosher culture entails. Is very important. And we find at social policy level, that's respected. Now let's look at our communities, such as the Turkish and Kurdish community. Maybe they've got language barrier. We know many of them are from the Muslim, they practice the Muslim faith. Is their culture, heritage, and identity important? Yes, and it's accepted. So one is respected, the Orthodox Jewish is respected, and one is protected. Now, how about the African and Caribbean heritage culture, the Black culture? Well, mainstream's vision of the Black culture is, well, there's no real barriers. They're second, third generation, they speak English as a first language. They can tap into our universal services. But yet we have an overrepresentation of young boys and to some extent young girls being excluded from schools. We know we're overrepresented in the criminal justice system. We know we're overrepresented in the mental health system. So why is it that our community are not using public services? They lack chi, culture, heritage, and identity. And I even know sisters and brothers who work within mainstream settings, and they say, yes, it's a westernized system. It's a westernized approach. So earlier we talked about the importance of organizing, and we do. We need to gain the same respect and the same protections as our other ethnic minority communities. We need to secure funding. So the first thing is to bring the data to policymakers' attention. We're overrepresented, and there's a big issue. We're overrepresented in negative areas, in poor outcomes for our communities. So we need to continue to fight for resources that protect our space. Our space is important. So I'll tell you a bit about what I've been doing. For years, campaigning with our local authority, and identifying what some of the hidden barriers are that are affecting our community. Space is a big issue. We have no space to meet and to go. Some of the communities have got buildings and resources. They pay peppercorn rent, even £1. They've got them 20, 30 years ago. They've got buildings to go to. So in terms of our community, we need to pay for space to be able to meet. Some of us congregate in our faith settings. Very, very few Black-led organisations have community buildings, own their own community space, and that's the biggest barrier. If you have no space to meet, then we will not connect and be able to create solutions. You can't do it in your household, Karen. We can't all meet in your house and create change. So we need public settings, approved settings to be able to work with. So for me, I've dropped the word Black because that gets very often diluted to BAME or BAME, and that's Black, Asian, Minority, Ethnic and Refugee. And then the minute you start talking about BAME, we start dropping the Black and we start talking about ethnic minorities. So we're dissolved, we're disintegrated. So if we stand up firm and talk about African Caribbean heritage communities, nobody can dilute our terminology. Nobody can dilute us. So that's the first thing, making sure we stand up and we be counted. Secondly, it's about valuing our approach. Each one, teach one. So what have I been able to do? Most of my work is informed by service users. It's all about being community-led. And I take the messages from what's on the ground, from our many communities. You've mentioned Sister Space, Lee, very important organization. And we have to represent, we have to reach the people in need, gain their trust, provide a whole range of support, and represent their views at policy level. And to an extent, continue to campaign to secure resources. We've got a right to resources like any other group. So what is the challenge? There's a lack of recognition and respect for the African Caribbean heritage culture. So within the borough I work in, I talk about 5 distinct African heritage communities: East African, West African, Central African, French-speaking African and Caribbean communities. There's a whole range of culture, heritage and identities to identify there. And I know people scribble down, they didn't think of it in that concept before, but there are a range of needs. And very often we're below the radar. We're not organised, there's not directories, we're not on many people's websites, and they can't pinpoint what we do. But the difference between our groups and the mainstream groups is that we're not service-led. It's not health, education, housing, employment, domestic violence, etc. We are service user-led. So we will organise ourselves and provide multiple services to the same beneficiaries or the same household. So we are service user-led. So what have we done? We've got a project in Hackney called Growing Minds. And as I said at the start, it's about parents improving and increasing parents' understanding of children's mental health. That came about because the data was irrefutable, without question. School-aged children were being excluded for behavioural issues. Parents didn't understand how to represent their children and support their children. So through this programme, we've been funded to promote the each one teach one approach, very much part of our Village to Raise a Child approach. So each one teach one is all about parents being trained up from the community organisers, the go-to trusted members of the community, being trained in some approved programs that's approved by the clinical commissioning group and specialists around mental health, so that communities understand the agendas that public sector are dealing with. But what's really important here is we examine these programs, revise these programs so it speaks to our African and Caribbean heritage communities. And what I want to see us do is attracting more of the funds to empower and engage our communities to be reshaping existing programs so that they meet our cultural heritage and identity needs. And we've been successful in doing that. One of the examples that comes to mind, is a parent recently had a separation from her husband, and this parent couldn't quite understand what was going on with her child. The child was seeming to be disrespectful to her, and she was trying to hold it down. Now she's in a household, husband had left, and now she's trying to make sure that she's managing that house. But through this each one teach one approach, all she needed was someone to talk to find out, well, how is your daughter expressing her feelings about this change, her father no longer living in the house. And they were able to go off and create time and space outside of the home where her daughter could say, this is what's happening for me, Mum. This is what the challenges are at school. These are the challenges in my life. And it wasn't that daughter was being disrespectful. She needed space to talk to her mum. So just through simple each one teach one approach, somebody being able to call in, especially during this period of COVID, to create space so that mother and child could talk, father and child could talk about how this has impacted, the separation has impacted. So that's just a micro example, but we sometimes don't know what's going on for our children, what makes them kick off, what makes them not respond. And in this time and space, we need to enable children to talk about how they are feeling so that they don't harbor challenging situations now, and then later they fester and they create stresses in their future relationships that then have an effect on the next generation. So we create programs to allow parents to have the space to talk to their children. And we have a saying in our community, prevention is better than cure. And that's what we've had to educate policymakers about. If we put in preventative measures now, the families that are at risk of having big issues later on, or intergenerational issues later on, can be prevented from doing so. Far too much of the money is invested in, we need to respond when it's far too late. So we just need to promote an early intervention, they call it, but I talk about prevention better than cure. That's what we want. And part of that prevention approach is awareness. Awareness about trauma, awareness so that we are more trauma-informed organization, awareness of what's triggering young people's stresses, and if they're not dealt with, it can escalate into long-term mental health issues. And it is about supporting both fathers and mothers. 2/3 of the participants in this program I'm talking about are are mothers, and 1/3 of them are fathers. So as you said, Karen, earlier, it's about both parts of our African heritage community working together to improve understanding of mental health as it affects our children. And then actually we can have an appreciation of how to manage and support our households to alleviate those issues. And we talked about materials to read. I read a book very early on in my life called Achieving at Primary and Failing at Secondary. And that's a book by Neil Myers. I recommend people read it. He's writing a refresher, but I recommend people read it. It's so important to wake up every morning and see positive images about yourself and positive reminders about our community and our contributors. And we can easily overlook the importance of that. Some people are affected by poverty, race inequality, and health inequality. And I think some of those are the seeds that we need to plant in our children, in our household, and just keep reminding ourselves that we are beautiful people, remind ourselves of our history and culture. So in terms of my journey, I've been on the Robin Walker Black History Studies program, and that's enabled me to have my own sense of pride and self-worth. And I say to mainstream policymakers, you need to fund some such programs, because if some people are affected by poverty and deprivation, they're just looking at how they're progressing within a mainstream context. So part of the role is about making sure mainstream respect our culture. They respect the Haredi culture, they respect the Turkish and Kurdish speaking culture, or they protect it. They need to respect our culture as well. So we need to fight for that. We need to acquire buildings and manage those buildings properly. Very often we get resources and we don't keep those resources. So we need to be able to report results and gain the trust of our communities and not feel afraid of representing them. So part of my role is about getting funds, but it's always about what do we want to do in our community, and then talking to policymakers, carving out funding. And as I've said, there are some tools that we can use. The national outcomes approach, I teach that. Becoming a trusted charity. I've got my manual here. It used to be called Picasso, I teach Picasso. It's the hallmark of a trusted charity. How can we create more trusted organizations that can attract resources? The best thing to do is come together and get organized in the form of a partnership, and then you can actually secure funding for each other. I've spoken for a while. Before I go, I have to tell you the complement to Growing Minds, which is about parents understanding children's mental health. I've got the privilege of working with Viv Amoun, and we're working on a program that complements Growing Minds called Open Minds, and that's about improving resident resilience to mental health. Again, not long after we're trapped and we've got mental health issues and concerns, but early on. And again, securing funds from policymakers, such as the National Health Clinical Commissioning Group, so that we can provide new solutions. So I'm proud to be working with Viv Amoun on that Open Minds Alliance. And we want to work with more boroughs across London, across the 9 regions of the UK and beyond, to make sure that whatever's happening in one borough, we have the same services available in other boroughs. And we want all services to understand that we respect ourselves. And part of their disservice to us is that they don't respect and appreciate that culture, heritage, and identity are important, so that you can gain the trust of the community and address this racial disparity and this health disparity, especially when it affects people affected by poverty. So yeah, come and get in touch with me, Christine Wellington. Happy to share my details. I work with social enterprises outside of my borough. I support organizations who want to create change with a colleague of mine. We work across the African and Caribbean community. So if you're a change maker, come and talk to me. We can look at how we can create real lasting change. Omar, watch out for that name. Open Minds Alliance, big changes right across the regions of the UK.
Same for Prime Minister. Christine, that you are going to be a very busy woman. A very busy woman, because that information that you just gave us there is revolutionary information, and not just in terms of the change that it can create and will create in our community. But I love how you talked about culture, heritage, and identity, and us bringing ourselves to the forefront. I think that can be, I think that even the term BAME, you said it so eloquently that even in that bracket, we often are at the bottom of the food chain. So everything that you've said in terms of enlightening us and empowering us and engaging with our own skill sets to produce and to provide solutions is revolutionary. So many people will be in touch. For those of you who are watching online, whether it be via Facebook or YouTube, at the bottom of the screen, you should see websites and information and contact details. And I'm sure even following this broadcast that Lee and the team will ensure that any recommendations that have been made will be made available to you. So thank you once again, all of those who are who are engaging in the chat with your comments and your questions. I appreciate it. It is 11:35, ladies. Can you believe this? We've been chatting for over an hour and a half, and it has been so profound, so enlightening, emotional at times. Thank you so much for sharing. I want us all to give a little wrap up, and I'm going to come to you each as we bring this thing to a close. I want to thank you for sharing a part of yourself. You know, for being open, for being transparent, for being vulnerable in sharing your stories and your journeys, because I know that everyone can relate to something that has been said here today, and particularly those of us, those of us who innately want to see change, and not only just want to see change, but want to be a part of that change. I think that this conversation has stirred something up in many of us. Well, I speak for myself, most definitely. So as we come to a close, ladies, you know, when women get together, we don't really want to leave each other, and because we're all just in a living room doing a group hug thing, metaphorically. Before you leave, I think the question that I want to ask you in relation to the subject of Black women and mental health is, do you have hope for the future? So I don't know how many of you have I think we've all got, has everyone got children? Whether you've got children or not, whether you've got, oh good. So or whether, you know, it's children within your community or within your family. When you think of life for the Black community in general, but specifically for Black women in the next 10, 20, 30 years, do you see a glimmer of hope? I love it when you said, Christine, about, you know, us owning our own buildings, community spaces and things like that, and just products and services that serve us. That doesn't, we don't have to dim our light in order for other communities to shine. It's not necessary. I think we've done that for far too long. I think that us having our own respect and recognition for our culture, heritage, and identity then demands that others do the same. There's a saying that says we teach people how to treat us. So as a community, if we respect ourselves, if we recognize ourselves and each other, then we teach other communities how to do the same. So looking forward, and I'm going to pose this to Lynn first, what do you see and what kind of hope do you have for the future of us as a community, but particularly for us as Black women?
Well, from working 35 years in public services, I've sort of given up with them. I don't think they can support our communities. They've tried and they've made small steps, but definitely not enough to secure proper support for our women and our children. I'm just going to echo what other people have said. So we need our own space. By having our own space, we can dictate how we support our community, how we support our women. Funding is key. And I know Christine spoke a lot about getting grants and things like that, but I think we need to start relying on ourselves. I think doing for ourselves is more important, because that way funding can't be taken away from us, especially when we've built resources that are supporting our women. So we have to find ways of generating our own funding and utilizing our own community resources. As you say, there's lots of therapists, lots of skilled people in our communities, and we have to find a way of capturing that. I like that term, prevention is better than cure. I grew up with that in my household and in my community. And I think we have to build resilience in our children, the next generation coming up. I don't think we can wait for other people to do that. We have to build resilience in our girls and our children so that they don't experience what we've experienced. What else can I say? I love the individual identity of African Caribbean heritage communities. We need to identify ourselves because we are a force to be reckoned with, and we are people that need our own resources. We can't be tagged on to any other groups. I don't think that works. They've tried it over decades and it hasn't worked. So we need to try something else. Also, I think Lee mentioned last week in the men's panel, he said something about having a mental health first aid book, but I think we need a directory of like mental health first aid resources and networks, and that needs to be sort of area specific so people can identify their own resources that they can get immediate access to. I think that's all I've got to say.
Then tell us quickly, just in case we don't get back around to you, tell us where we can get your book, what your book's called, and tell us one reason why we should all read your book. Tell us.
Okay. So the book is called Wide Awake in a Dream. My website details is going across the page at the bottom. It's on Amazon. The reason you should read this book, because we all know someone who's gone through a major health trauma. And we all know women that have suffered in some way or another. So it talks about motherhood. It talks about how you survive in a loveless relationship. It talks about going through separation. It talks about becoming a single parent. And it talks about ways that you can try and do things for yourself when there's no resources around you to support you. I mean, it might work for some people. It might not work for others. But it also talks about carers, how carers can support people going through trauma. And I think it's just a good read. I think it will touch women, definitely. Wide Awake in a Dream.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rosalind. We may get a chance to touch back with you, but before we do, thank you. I want to encourage everyone who's listening as we talk about doing for self and supporting each other. Let us not just be hearers of what she's saying. Let us actually actively be a supporter of what Rosalind is doing, what she has done in not just going through her traumatic experience, but also taking the time to document it so that somebody can be empowered by it. So please jump over to Amazon, and even if you don't get the book for yourself, get it for someone else, because somebody could do with the words that are written in that book. Sister Maxine, tell me, do you have hope for the future in relation to us as a community working together, setting up policies, procedures? I love what Christine talked about, you know, not just talking about change, but being a part of that change. What do you see looking forward in terms of this discussion as well around mental health and Black women? Do you think it will be a much more open discussion moving forward? Tell me what you see when you look into the future.
I really think that the future is bright. That doesn't mean the road is not rocky, as we say in the songs. You know, I mean, the road is rocky, but the future is bright. You know, we come from a long history, a long line of powerful women who have contributed to, you know, fighting against the colonization of our people, fighting against the enslavement of our people, and leading the fight against racism, discrimination, and these health inequalities that we're experiencing here in the West. You know, but our young people don't know this. This is not the food that we are reared on. You know, we only come to know this when we grow up and we go and research in a certain way. This knowledge of self needs to be embedded in the home. In the home, it needs to be part of parenting, whether the parents are together or they're not together. You know, we need this knowledge of self to start very early, because it helps to build resistance, because the road will continue to be rocky, but the future is bright. I believe now that we as women have more opportunities to express ourselves and to live in different ways. This will help with our mental well-being. I think we've been through a long period of repression, oppression, and repression, because we're externally controlled as a people. So on the mental health front, I think we need to organize nationally to have a national voice. One of the things I want to say, the population of Northern Ireland is 1.5 million. The population of African Caribbean people in the UK is 2 to 3 million. Yet we have no political organization to have our voice heard. And I think that's what we need to be moving towards. If we are to remain in this country, given what it brings, then we need to get ourselves effectively organized. But yeah, I believe the future is bright. Look at our young girls. You know, they're on about their hair, their complexion, their bodies. They're out there, you know, they're out there now promoting their self-worth. We have to make sure that they don't fall prey to, you know, to European standards, and it doesn't just become about being a commodity and what you can sell and what you can buy. We have to try and ensure that it's connected to our history, our current experience, and it's connected to uplifting ourselves as a whole, as a people. One more comment. I think we really need to try, and I don't know where we've got this from. If we talk about men or we talk about women, it becomes one against the other. It doesn't have to be one against the other. Men and women have always existed. That means there are things to be said about the Black man, and there are things to be said about the Black woman, and then there are things to be said about the Black community. It's not an either or. And I think this is part of the psychological stress that we experience when we're thinking through ideas, where we're always pitting our ideas against for power. The battle for power between men and women, Black man and woman, is the wrong battle to be fighting at this moment. The battle for power is for the survival of our people. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sister Maxine. I love when you said the road is rocky, but the future is bright. And I think that that should give us all a sense of hope, because we know that it's not necessarily going to be easy, but it is absolutely going to be worth it. And that the work that you are all doing as Black women in your own spheres and your own fields is making an impact. And again, I want to thank you all for coming on. I want to jump to Jennifer. I cannot believe that we just got over 10 minutes to go. The conversation has been so gripping and so engaging and so empowering. Jennifer, tell me, with the work that you are doing as a director at Janus Solutions and with your own private practice, I'm sure that you have seen many great stories, many great restoration stories, as well as stories of hope. And I really want to leave the conversation with an element of us thinking, you know what, we can do this. We can do this, not just as Black women, but as Black women and Black men together, coming together to work together to make a better future for our children, for those coming behind us. So just tell me, what do you see in the future? Do you see like totally humanistic across the globe? What do you see? Tell me what you see, girl.
Firstly, I would like to say that thank you for inviting me on this forum. But also, I do have hope and faith that our community will be unified once again. I definitely have that. In regarding, as a collective, we have to come together. I feel that what has happened now in this social trauma is allowing us to have space to sit with ourselves and to understand ourselves just a little bit more without all of those distractions and avoidance and denials that we can invest in when we are not looking at ourselves. So if COVID-19 has allowed this to happen, then I believe that something is going to happen for us, because this is now the first time that we are able to sit in isolation with ourselves without any distraction. So I want to, even though COVID-19 has brought a massive social trauma to this country and to us with our grief, we have to learn to let go so that we can mourn and that we can grieve. One of the talkers talked about to letting go in order to find yourself. Yes, you have to let go in order to find yourself. Having the courage, I want to say, having the courage and be courageous to speak about what is going on for you, and finding those spaces. I'm totally humanistic. You can find me or Google me, Jennifer Jordan, also Janus Solutions in Brixton. I have a low-cost counselling service that you can attend, and there are lots of Black therapists there that can help you work and support you through your traumas and your mental health. I'm also, if with investment begets return. So in regarding us to invest in our community, we definitely will have a return, definitely. And in regarding funding, yeah, we can go to the funding, but we have a lot of resources within our own community that we can fund our own things. Myself and my husband, we done that ourselves. We didn't ask anything from anybody. That means that our carpet cannot be taken under our feet because it's our own. And when you start to own your own things, nobody can determine to you what you bring or how you bring it. So in regarding that, we can do this. And I definitely believe that we can, but we just need to keep connected, because as they say, it takes a village. And I do believe that our village is coming together. Even by this forum, I can see that great minds, great thinkers, and together we can be initiative and creative, and we can make things happen. So it's bye. I'm saying bye-bye and thank you.
Jennifer, I am fighting tears, like seriously, because as you're all speaking, like my hope is just rising. I'm like, yes, we can do this. Yes, it's going to be amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you and your husband are doing in your team at Totally Humanistic. Thank you for making the sacrifice. Thank you for sowing the seed, knowing that I don't know if you can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I was just saying thank you for sowing the seed, knowing that you will indeed reap a harvest. And from the fruit of what you're doing, it won't just be just for you and those within your circle, but as you know, I think it was maybe you that said it about each one teach one, or possibly Christine, that as we teach one, as we reach out to others, then it goes so much further than we could ever imagine. So thank you again, Jennifer. Christine, as we come to you, for our final words, tell me what you see in the future. You know, based on what you've said so far, it's powerful, it's profound. I believe that many will connect with you. I think you're all going to be connected by somebody for some reason. But in terms of building blocks and laying foundations for a better and brighter future, Christine, tell us what you see, girl.
In my mind, I absolutely see a brighter future. That's one of the programs I named, and the mayor the Boris Johnson years ago funded the program, Brighter Futures Mentoring Program. That was a start, the catalyst for change, improving outcomes for our young people and the next generation. I see a future where we are having conversations about mental health within our households quite openly, and there's less stigma and shame about mental health and much more support. And that's about us coming together, talking about mental health well-being within, whether in faith or community settings. We need to have those conversations with the next generation, giving young people space to talk, women coming together, men coming together. There's a lot. I see a brighter future. I agree with the point about self-funding, but I am righteous about the fact that we are taxpayers. We are entitled to the funds from grant-making trusts. We're entitled to the funds from government. We are overrepresented, and we have the solutions. And that's why I'm an advocate of us making sure that we're represented at policy level. So I see a definite brighter future. I'd love to be part of any initiative which is helping us to create that Open Minds Alliance right across the region, right across the UK and beyond. So how can we come together, connect and support each other to be the change we want to see, especially for the next generation? My parting comment is this, that we have a big brother, if you like, in the system, and it's the systemic policymakers that can take over the role of the family. And we can't have that. We need to have an investment in our own families. The family is the strongest institution that we have. And if we allow the family to be broken down, then we are going to have more mental health issues. There's going to be more pressure on women, on men, on fathers and mothers and siblings and grandparents. So the family is the strongest institution. And there is a systematic attack on the African and Caribbean heritage family. And I see a future where we're conscious of that, and we bring that consciousness and clarity to influencers, to policymakers, and we don't just ask for resources, we command our resources respectfully, and we have we have culturally appropriate solutions. So that's what I want us to do, stand up for our culture, heritage and identity, and create the change we want to see. Thank you all for letting me on this platform. You can contact me at either Hackney CVS or at christinewellington@gmail.com. I'm really looking forward to being part of initiatives that create change for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, Rosalind, Jennifer, and Sister Maxine. You are amazing, okay? Every single one of you have been so profound. You've been so powerful that you got my mind exploding. You know, I thought I was a powerhouse. Now I bow to your power, ladies, completely. Thank you for what you've done in the community. Thank you for what you're doing in our communities. Thank you for the seeds that you have sown. Thank you for the foundations that you have laid. Thank you for being open. Thank you for being honest. We really appreciate you. Before I bring in my host, if you have one final thing that you want to say, okay, good. I see Rosalind has put her hand up. Can we unmute Rosalind's mic? Rosalind, go ahead, my love.
I just wanted to say thank you for inviting me to this panel of such amazing women. And also, Karen, I wanted to say you did a brilliant job today holding us all together and summarising. And thank Lee for this platform. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, thank you. Let me bring my esteemed host. Is Mr. Jasper in the building? Are you in the house? We have 3 minutes to go until the end of our program. May I see the handsome king in the house? Lee, weren't our guests absolutely astounding today? Tell me about what you think. Can't hear you. Can't hear Lee. We're not hearing Lee at the moment. Ladies, can you hear Lee?
No.
Okay, Lee, we can't hear you. We can't hear you. Okay, cool. So they'll get, while they're fixing Lee's mic, because I know that he'll jump on in a minute, I just want to say, those of you who are on the chat, who have joined us on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you're joining us from, whether you're in the UK, in London, or wherever you're from, I want to thank you for being on the Lee Jasper Drive Time show today. I want to thank you for your comments. I want to thank you for your input. It has been amazing just watching the comments. Sorry we didn't get to any of the questions, but I needed these ladies to share their stories and their experiences and their expertise. We have got websites and details still on the screen. And for those of you who have missed anything, I'm sure that we can contact Lee Jasper via his Facebook or MediaNet Live, and we will be able to get that information to you. Have we got Lee back? Have we got Lee back with sound?
I think so. I just say I can retire. I think I'll hand over the show to Karen Allen.
Never.
No, I'm serious. I want to be able to share the platform with you on future occasions, and I think that I'd be delighted if you'd accept an invitation to come back and join us on other issues. As far as our guests are concerned, and the fantastic panel. Anytime that you get Black people together and have a sensible discussion, it's wisdom, it's intelligence, it's compassion, and it's empathy. And the panel today has been no different. If you didn't watch the Black Man's panel last week, then watch these 2 programs back to back, and you're going to get a whole heap of wisdom and energy coming in your direction. I'd like to thank again Karen, because she's done such a fabulous job. Give her some props out there on the comments and follow her on her own page. Your information is across the bottom of the screen. Lee Jasper Drive Time will be back next week. We're going to focus on the issue of domestic violence, and we're going to dig deep into that, because I have a passion in relation to talking to Black men about their relationship with Black women and how we have to take responsibility for our actions and heal the family, not harm the family. And we'll be digging deep on that next week between 10 and 12. So do join us for that. Now, tomorrow, I'll be back on your screens with another co-host, Mr. Viv Amoon, who's made mention of so many times during today's program, another king in the Black Sox empire, along with the Queen, Patricia Lamore, and Rosalind Daisley, and many more, Bella Blake, and Courtney Brown. I could just name them. But we'll be doing tomorrow at 4:00, where we're going to have this international discussion about the impact of the COVID virus on Black communities right across the world. Let me tell you, you've got to be part of this discussion. Why? Because it's so few times that the international diaspora of Africans comes together to talk about how we can respond to crisis. This is going to be one of those few times. We're going to hear from the Caribbean about why they've avoided so many COVID deaths. We're going to hear from Brazil. Many people won't know this, Karen, but Brazil has the largest African diaspora of anywhere in the world outside of Africa. More than America, more than Europe, more than anywhere else. And yet we never hear about African Brazilians.
That's amazing. That's amazing information to know.
Absolutely. And the Professor Celilia Praces, I hope I pronounced that right, will be on the program straight from Sao Paulo, Brazil tomorrow. And she'll be giving us deep insight into what the Brazilians are suffering underneath a president who's very much like Donald Trump, called Bolsonaro. And he's leaving Africans to die in their thousands in Brazil. And we'll be with the Reverend Al Sharpton. Everybody knows the old Reverend from New York. And he'll be telling us what's happening in New York to the African-American community. And Professor PLO Lumumba. If you've never heard this professor speak, oh man, he's going to take you to church tomorrow, because my man he's the doyen of Pan-Africanism on the African continent. Those are just the headline speakers. Time doesn't allow, because we're overrunning our period, to mention everybody else. But there is a whole range of other speakers that will edify and educate you. Lord Simon, Woolley, David, Weaver. Oh my days, I could go on and on and on. But look for the leaflet. It's on my Facebook page. Thank you to MediaNet, who've handled this very, very slickly. This is what I mean about having our own stuff. This is independent. Ain't nobody interfering with this channel. So thank you, Theo, at MediaNet. Join us tomorrow at 4 o'clock on the MediaNet channel for this international discussion. Thanks once again to my great co-host, the fabulous Karen Allen. This is Lee Jasper for Lee Jasper Drive Time, signing out. Have a great day.